Joining us today, we have an independent star on the rise over here in New York City. He is the unpredictable JGeorge. Thanks for joining us. How's everything going?
Hey man, it's going really well, hanging in there. Thank you so much for having me on. It's truly a pleasure. Appreciate you giving me the space and the time.
Yeah, man, no problem. For anybody listening that may not know who JGeorge is, can you kind of give us a little bit of a background on you?
Yeah. I've been basically going on here. I started out in the New York scene about 4 years ago. I go under the name the unpredictable JGeorge. Many have said my work to be dynamic, controversial, influential, inspirational. But I've been also going throughout the country, throughout the Midwest, up and down the East Coast, anywhere I can go out to get my name out there. And I started out training at Warriors Wrestling. It was truly happenstance the way everything happened. It was like, it's just weird, and it's one of those things that I've been learning along this journey of pro wrestling, where like how certain things happen at the right place and at the right time. About 5-6 years ago, I was at this show in Rahway. It was New Japan Attacks the East Coast or something like that, where they were doing a tour, and I'd gotten tickets to that, and I'm sitting in the front where this kid sits next to me, nerdy looking kid, and he was telling me, he's like, we're just talking about the show, and we were marking out for all this stuff, and we became buds, and we stayed in contact on Facebook. And one day I told him how, man, I still, I really want to be a professional wrestler. I'd actually attempted to wrestle back in like 2009. I trained at BWO. It was like for really a cup of coffee, and things were just right for me to do it. And a few months after talking to this kid, I see him, he's in a wrestling room. And I asked him about it, and he tells me about the school, and I went to go check it out, and it was literally in the middle of a garbage dump in Staten Island, like literally in the middle of a dump, and I hated Staten Island to begin with, but the school itself had like a charm to it, and Joey B was there, the American Nightmare Logan Black was there as well. And I trained under them, and they kind of molded me and helped me become the wrestler I am today.
Before you got into training, I'm going to say that you were a fan of wrestling. You are a fan of wrestling, or else why would you be in it? But before you even trained or became a wrestler, did you go into the training as like, this is easy, anybody could do it, or man, do I really want to do this, or what? How did you think about all the training that was involved when you started?
So like I said, I first started when I was like 19 or so, but I never really stuck with it because at the time I wasn't mature enough. I didn't have my license, I didn't have a car, and it was and I thought it was too much of a hassle to take the bus, which like looking back at it now, I thought it was kind of laughable, but and the training there at the time wasn't, exactly helping me in terms of, there wasn't a lot of positive reinforcement as that probably would have helped me stick around. And thankfully that was there a lot more in Warriors, even though it was still very tough and strenuous. But by the time I'd started training, I just was pretty much hell bent on just sticking with this no matter what, and everything just fit into the proper pieces. I met the right people, and I got the proper training, and I just fell more and more in love with the sport than I'd already been my whole life. And that was just a part of the training, and then just part of my mentality at the time. I had just graduated college. I just lost my job, and all the money I'd saved up at that point just went right into wrestling training, and I just had I put myself in a position where I had no choice. I could have been looking for work in my field of study after college and focusing on that and have a more soluble career from from that standpoint. But at the point in time, I knew all the risk and all that was worth it, because now is getting to live out my dream.
Before you walk out that curtain or whatnot, who are we about to witness? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I started realizing my potential, what I could be, and I saw a lot of that was inspired at the time by people like Kanye West and Lady Gaga and people like that who can really come out onto their own and project that to people, and make that something powerful, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I really admire people who could do stuff like that, you know, like Orson Welles, you know? And so it's outside of wrestling, those people are huge influences on me. People compare me a lot lately to Prince because I wear mascara sometimes, but I'm more Dave Chappelle's version of Prince than actual Prince. Like,
Sure.
you know what I mean? I can name 2 Prince songs, maybe. You know, I was never really intent, but still, the idea of people influence, you know, like David Bowie and stuff, they have small influences, you know. And when it comes to wrestling, you know, like people like Roddy Piper and the Great Muta, which might sound like very far off, but like there's a lot of, you know, these are guys that have a lot of layers to who they are as people. They're not afraid to get dark, but they're also just, you know, they have a certain presence. Like Vampiro is another guy who I just have the biggest admiration for, you know.
As an independent wrestler, can you tell me about just marketing yourself? Because I mean, social media is what we have nowadays, right? I mean, this is how everybody gets themselves over, if you will. Do you find it as an independent wrestler easy or hard, or I don't know? How do you feel about just trying to get the word out about you, you know, for bookings or whatnot? I mean, in this day and age with Twitter and Facebook and whatnot, do you find it easier, or is it just like a constant day job? You kind of have to keep spreading the word, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, and you would know as well with, you know, how you have to market your podcast and stuff because we're reaching the same audience. So it's like, and now, I mean, in the sense it is easier, but there's like so many levels to how this stuff works that I'm like trying to figure out algorithms and like how certain thing reaches certain audiences. And I just try to study other people, and, you know, I have my own ways of getting out there and stuff. So like, you know, for a while I was doing a lot of stunts on Facebook's live stream, and I was getting a lot of attention that way, and that got me booked on a show or two because I had an audience there with what I was doing. It was stupid, like it would be stuff like me eating pizza with a fork on live stream. People wanted to see that for whatever reason.
Sure.
And or me reading one time I read the entire B-movie script, you know. And you know, just stuff like that. Like, I mean, just finding ways to stand out and make noise, and it's definitely an easier platform to reach than what people had years ago, where it was like you had to get your tapes out there. Now it's just like you just got to post it and just hope for the right, you know. And I've seen people, I see people all the time get promoted and pushed out there because of the, you know, just their social media attraction, you know.
Sure.
It's pretty wild. Like one of my friends out from California, Thunder Rosa, I don't know if you know who she is. Yep. But she's all over the place, and she's mostly just off of her presence online, and she knows she knows how to promote herself. She, you know, and it's all part of the process. I don't use anything on social media for anything personal. It's all business for me.
Sure. Now, one of the perks about being a pro wrestler is that you kind of get to travel around, see different places, different states, different cities, different countries. But for you, can you tell us a little bit about your time down in Mexico City? How was it for you? Was that your first time down there?
Yeah, so for whatever reason, I had family out there. I'm not actually Mexican, but I had a family that lives out there. And I went out to visit them, and I had it really was just, it was always in the back of my mind of going out there and doing something. And because I wanted to follow, you know, people like, you know, again, Chris Jericho and Lance Storm and these guys who've wrestled, Eddie Guerrero, who just wrestled all over the world and honed their craft. Mexico's a huge place there for me, especially growing up, being such a big fan of Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio. And Conan, being influenced by those guys. So I knew Mexico was a destination for me. I went out there and I had the pleasure of training. This is actually pretty cool because I got to train in CMLL, which is, you know, it's the oldest wrestling arena in the world. And it's the oldest promotion in the world, which was a very surreal experience.
I read an interview with you online. Now, hear me out. The question asked to you was, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself as you were starting out in the business? You answered, be aware of political implications. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about maybe the state of the New York City indie and the politics behind them?
That type of thing doesn't go far past the indie scene. You know, it happens on bigger stages all the time, and it's one of those sad realities about wrestling sometimes, where it's not always about how good you are, or what you can bring to the table. If the person who the promoter or the booker doesn't like you, or he's not on the same page as you, then you're not gonna reap any benefits from your hard work, and it's rampant. My issue is, I don't know what shows you go to. Is there a lot of places out there? And this is a sad reality, is that anybody could just run a wrestling show now. Anyone who has the right pocketbook and the right contacts can put together a wrestling show, and that's fine and all, if that's what someone wants to do. But then they start these people start thinking they have any sort of opinion, or it starts getting disgusting when you think about what kind of people have essentially control over your destiny or your career or your financial situation, because now they think they have a word in edgewise, and it starts affecting you in other places where that's becoming a big problem, because I can name all these promotions out, and that are being ran by people that are just and they think they have some sort of opinion now on what good wrestling is, and I've seen in many cases, even outside of my own personal situations, where these promoters will deliberately ignore the fans' reactions, and just and it's a shame. And the people in New York, they still want the wrestling, so you got to give it to them. And despite who's running these promotions, it's still a place to work. It's still a place to make a payday, and it's still a place to get exposure. And that's very important. But it's very disheartening too to go after something like that. And you were asking me before about like having reservations and stuff, and thinking about, can I do this? You start to doubt yourself a little bit, and then I see it all the time when people, quote unquote retire. I think is nonsensical. You don't retire from this because there's, you're not employed. You're you just stop working. There's a difference there.
Yeah.
Unless you're making a living out of this, then I would say, yeah, you're retiring. But when people who wrestle once or twice a month and then make these long posts on Facebook like, oh, I'm retiring, that's just, I don't know, it's kind of dumb. But but yeah, that's why they do it though, because they they doubt themselves and they stop believing in themselves, and they don't get used anywhere. I'm lucky enough that I still have places where I can shine, and then I don't just keep myself in the New York indie bubble. I reach out a little bit further than that, and I hope that that'll be an advantage. The sad part is though that these political implications, they exist everywhere. It's just a reality of the business. But you really do, like in wrestling, you have to be careful with what information you have and what information you share with other people, because you don't think it will at the time, but it'll come back and bite your butt, and and it's a headache. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes Yep. I've had heat with people. I showed up one time to a locker room. It was for NYWC, and the promoter comes up to me. He's like, "Hey man, you gotta before you go out there, you gotta go squash this heat with this guy." And I was like, "What? Who?" Who? And I didn't even know this guy. And I was talking to this guy. I essentially had heat with this guy just because I happened to be friends with someone he didn't like, just because I associated with someone. It was just so silly, and
it's like high school all over again, right?
Yeah, but and then that's the thing. That's those implications.
Where can the fans see you coming up at any coming shows in the tri-state area?
I'm going to be in Providence, Rhode Island, May 28th for Live Pro of Wrestling. May 12th and 13th, Warriors of Wrestling. We have Billy Gunn and Al Snow are going to be there, and that's going to be in Brooklyn, New York on the 12th, and the 13th in Staten Island. Some big matches coming up there, and Blitzkrieg Pro June 2nd.
This whole world of social media, where can they keep up with you and follow all that?
That's at JGeorge, JGeorge 489. That's my Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. You can find me at JGeorge on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, JGeorge, I mean, this is just the beginning. I'm sure we'll be talking with you again down the line. We thank you so much for coming on today, and we wish you nothing but the best in your future career.
Hey, man, thank you so much for having me.